Bev McArthur, Liberal MP for Western Victoria. Morning, Bev.
Morning, Mitch.
Well, how's your Queen's Birthday weekend going?
All the better for talking to you, Mitch, and your listeners.
So in terms of what we've seen over the weekend, probably the big news is the protest that took place. I mean, I think you can make a point to say that it may not be safe to have so many people descending on one location, but is it a bit of a slippery slope for the government to start saying what issues people can protest about and what they can't?
Mitch, it's quite simple. The government have laid down very stringent conditions as to how all of us can operate in this pandemic. A restaurant across the road from Parliament House will be fined $10,000 if they have 21 people in it. We've not been allowed to go to funerals. Weddings have been cancelled. We're trying to celebrate and remember those people that fought for us on Anzac Day. We did it in our driveways with a candle. But no, it's quite all right for 30,000 people to assemble en masse. Now, regardless of the issue, the main issue here is why are there different rules for different people?
What about the argument they had masks and they were using hand sanitizer at the protest?
Well, we've all been advised to keep our distance from each other, to use hand sanitizer, to wash our hands with soap and water, to sneeze into our elbow, and to stay at home if at all possible. In the Parliament, the House of Assembly was not able to meet in full because there wasn't enough space. So many MPs were denied the opportunity to represent their constituents. Parliamentary committees are still meeting on Zoom because the public servants need to stay home because that's a directive from the Chief Health Officer. Whether you've got hand sanitizer or mask makes no difference. The whole society here in Victoria have been told to comply with these rules and regulations. Now, if there's no threat to our health through mass gatherings, well then why on earth are we in this lockdown? Unlock it, Mr. Andrews, and let us all gather en masse wherever we like, but particularly to support businesses that have, many of them have just closed down forever, of thousands on the unemployed list, and we think it's okay for some people to gather en masse, but you can't have a football match and go and watch it, whether you've got hand sanitizer or not. I mean, no, rules have got to apply equally to everybody if you're going to have them. Otherwise, don't have them.
Didn't you also attend a protest in relation to the Brumby shooting issue?
I certainly did. I've attended several, and they've been totally policed by the police, and all the rules and regulations have been complied to. The first one I attended, only 10 people were allowed to gather at that time, and 10 people rotated in a circle 1.5 metres or more apart in front of the Premier's office, and they did it for hours, and they rotated 10 people at a time. The most recent one on the steps of Parliament House, I was there. I spoke to the police. Only 10 people were allowed to stand on the steps with their placards 1.5 metres apart. And everybody complied with all those rules and regulations, and were more than happy to do so. That's fine. If you want to protest within the rules.
And in terms of this Brumby shooting issue, Parliament sat last week, and I believe the Legislative Council passed a motion against the government's policy, but I guess that doesn't mean much unless you can actually get legislation through the Assembly.
That's correct, Mitch. Extraordinarily, the Legislative Council passed this motion without the government deciding to call a division, because they were, of course, concerned they were going to get defeated. They effectively, two Labor MPs, including Jala Pulford, a member for Western Victoria region, spoke effectively against the motion in favour of shooting the Brumbies, but they decided not to call a division, so therefore the motion was carried unanimously. And now it does send a very strong message to the government and the Minister for the Environment and Parks Victoria. Sure, they can set about and totally defy the voices of Parliament and the representatives of the entire upper house of Victoria. They can defy that. They can do it easily. I mean, this government doesn't really take much notice of what anybody thinks. They'll charge along and do whatever they like. And this is a case in point. And certainly, unless you can get a bill or legislation through the lower house, what the upper house do, doesn't particularly matter in the government's eyes. I think it matters in the public's eyes. And if you want to have a look at the thousands of emails and messages we're all receiving on this matter from all over Victoria, Australia, and internationally. The world is watching Victoria on this matter, and it's not a good look just to set out and shoot some horses so you can tick a box and say you've done something for the environment. It's a very bad move on the government's part.
Well, what would you like to see done in that area? Because we had Andy Medic on the program last week, and maybe this is an issue where you can agree with him in terms of you're against the shooting, but he said you've still got to look at managing that space, and the horses still have quite a detrimental impact on the environment. Would you support trapping the horses or any sort of management programs via that method, or are you just happy with what they're doing now?
Mitch, these horses were always very well managed when mountain cattlemen were able to graze the area and keep the undergrowth down. You know, the areas that were not burnt in recent fires were the areas that had been previously grazed, and they provided a safe refuge for many animals, including native animals, to escape from the ravages of the fires. Parks Victoria have got a shocking reputation for not being able to manage their jurisdiction properly, whether it's a park, a forest or a roadside. They're left wanting. And in these areas, without grazing and management by local farmers, we've now got non-native vegetation out of control, blackberries running rampant, and you can see that on many roadsides as well where they don't manage these noxious weeds. We've got extraordinary numbers of deer. Estimates I've heard and seen are between 300 to 500 to one horse. Pigs are now rampant. We've got wild dogs and cats. And the wild dogs are causing no end of trouble, not only to the native wildlife, but to neighbouring farms where I've seen the devastation caused by dogs attacking lambs and sheep. We've got foxes out of control. So a lot of non-native animals causing massive destruction. I heard the most ridiculous thing in the chamber the other day where I think it was one of the Labor members who said that the horses are muddying up areas and damaging moss fields. Well, actually, horses don't want to wallow in mud. They don't even want to go near water if they don't have to. They'll drink it and step right away. Hence, you have very complicated jumps in show jumping in cross country to try and make a horse jump over water when it actually naturally doesn't want to go put a foot in it. So total ignorance on how horses actually behave. At the time of rutting, the deer caused considerable damage to trees where they ring-bark trees with their antlers. And some of the boars and stags are as big, if not bigger, than some of the Brumbies. So, let's get, a reality check here. If Parks Victoria want to do something for the environment, and they should have reduced the fuel loads so we weren't all burnt out in the forest, they can first look at the non-native vegetation, which is causing no end of trouble for fuel loads and suffocating native grasses, and that happens on roadsides as well. And they can then look at the other non-native animals that are causing so much trouble. These horses are a significant part of Australia's history, and like they are in many other parts of the world, they're non-native in America, the Mustangs, in England, the New Forest ponies and the Exmoor ponies. They're protected, lauded, and actually become a sort of major attraction But no, here we'd like to shoot the whole lot of them. Extraordinary.
When you talk about managing the other non-native species in the area, is there any other option other than shooting them? Because when we talk about trapping and all that, it sounds very complicated and not sure if that actually works.
Are we talking about trapping horses or deer and pigs?
Deer, the pigs. What's the actual issue there?
No, I mean, the last effort I understand Parks Victoria were engaged in was trying to reduce the deer numbers was from a helicopter. As I heard figures like $2,000 an hour, and they might have shot 150. Nobody knows whether they were left in pain or, not killed instantly, but they were certainly left for the dogs to feed on. So they created another problem. Deer are determined as game here in Victoria, and there are professional game hunters, and that's why they're declared game. So professional game hunters can shoot them, and they do it by ensuring, as they do in other parts of the world where there are game, not reserves, but estates. And only the old and infirmed, and if there are too many females, they're taken out. But it's all done judiciously and managed properly, not randomly. I mean, we set about shooting some of these horses. They move quite quickly, and what ends up happening is they can never, one shot will never actually kill them. They'll die a painful death. Often they'll have shot a mare and leave a foal without its mother. Now, horses only breed, if they're lucky, one foal a year, and these horses don't live a very long time in the wild as they do in other situations where we give them veterinary treatment and so on. They can live into their 20s. That doesn't happen in the wild. They're lucky to live a decade. So the other animals are causing immense destruction. Pigs, wallow in mud. That's how they operate. And they have to be dealt with. But I'm not sure Parks Victoria are capable of doing it. I mean, we've got a problem where they can't even manage the lavatory block of the 12 apostles. So I'm not really confident they can manage any of these situations.
Now, Cedar Meats, you spoke in Parliament last week, and your speech was along the lines of saying cedar tracing and testing gets a fail. Why?
Well, because it was a long time before we all knew that there was a problem at Cedar Meats. Yet throughout this time, there were livestock deliveries occurring, obviously, because it's an abattoir. So, livestock are taken there on a daily basis, I imagine, to be slaughtered. And those livestock transports, many of them did not know that there was even a problem at Cedar Meats. So, the minute there was a problem, all tracing should have occurred. I mean, I recall how the minister quickly, called out a doctor in Toorak who'd found to have the virus, and, there was all hell to play. Well, for some weeks this was going on and nothing was done. And the results are a considerable cluster. Probably the biggest cluster in Victoria has resulted from Cedar Meats. Now, some might be pointing to the coincidence that this organisation actually is a donor to the Labor Party. But, be that as it may, the health system, and we've got a chief health officer and a deputy health officer, what were they doing? And I think everybody who went there should have been traced and perhaps asked to be tested, but that didn't happen. And I think they're probably lucky there are not a lot more cases. Livestock deliveries, transport drivers were then, visiting another premises to collect stock and so on. They didn't even know there was a problem. I mean, if we're going to have tracing and testing, then let's do it properly.
And I read in the Age newspaper, it says Liberal MP Bev McArthur has referred the Attorney General and her department to IBAC. Can you explain why?
Well, Mitch, one of the most outrageous pieces of legislation has come before the Parliament, and it's going to give class action lawyers a gold card to get we will legislate to give them a percentage of the payout to victims in a class action. Now, this doesn't happen anywhere else in Australia, and it happens in California. California is known as the class action capital of the world. We'll be the next one. This is anti-victim, anti-plaintiff, anti-business, and anti-justice. I mean, normally the justice system has costs awarded to the lawyers on the basis of the work they've delivered. This ensures there's a business model. These lawyers in class action law firms have got an incentive now to go out and pursue class actions because they're going to get a percentage of the payout. This is unheard of in the justice system. Apart from that, there's going to be a situation where everybody will be included in a class action, and you'll have to opt out, but you won't even know you've been included. It's an extraordinary situation. But what I've referred the Minister and the Premier to IBAC for is because we need to know, before we debate this any further, whether there have been conversations and meetings taking place between the Attorney General and the Premier and Morris Blackburn in particular, which is the biggest class action law firm, here with about 17.8% of the class actions. They manage them. They're also big donors to the Labor Party. Now, we want to know if somebody's got an incentive to put this legislation through the Parliament. We need to know exactly what's happened behind the scenes before we debate this. We can't be having a situation where people have in effect got a conflict of interest on this.
And just last of all, to finish off with interesting talk about industrial relations at the moment, IR at a federal government level and at a union level. It's a long weekend, so of course this brings in the whole debate about penalty rates. But what do you think of the casualisation of the workforce? And I think what we've learned at the moment as a result of COVID-19 about just how much insecure work there is. Should we be looking at trying to make it more secure for casual workers with things like annual leave and sick leave?
Well, fine, Mitch. But the federal court decision recently said that casual workers who already paid 25% premium because you're casual and therefore not entitled to all the other benefits are now going to get the other benefits as well. They'll effectively be paid more than a permanent part-time or permanent full-time worker. This is ridiculous. And if you look at some of the research, it shows that actually many people like the ability to be a casual worker. They can work when they please. They don't have to work at set times. And it's a stepping stone for many people to get into the workforce. It's also been a very useful tool for students. And I know, many students who are casual workers and they like it. Sometimes they can't go to work because they've got an exam coming up or they want to study, and that's fine. And they're paid a premium so that's allowed for. So I think, what do you want? Do you want people to be employed or not? And in this situation now where so many people are unemployed, we've got to make it easy for people to get back into the workforce, not more difficult. This is a very unfortunate court decision, which I understand will probably be appealed to the High Court.
Thanks for being on the program. We'll catch up with you again next month.
No problem, Mitch. Bye.
Thank you, Beverly McArthur there, MP for Western Victoria.